Good evening and welcome to the vote.je candidate question time. And this evening we've got the candidates for St John, St Lawrence and Trinity. 8 candidates in total for 4 seats. We have 7 with us in the room this evening. So please now get your questions in for the candidates. They're here to answer your questions. They will each have 1 minute to answer. We will prioritise questions which are for the constituency, but obviously there will be a lot of island-wide issues. I'm also going to ask you not to send in questions which are aimed at individuals, please, because it needs to be fair to everybody so that everybody can answer the question. And let's hear from the candidates about what's going to happen if they're elected in the next assembly. So I'm going to first of all introduce everybody. Welcome to all candidates. Thank you for coming this evening. To my left, I've got Gregory Guida, who is Jersey Alliance. Andy Howell, who is standing as an independent.
Hello there.
Hilary Jearn, who is also an independent.
Hello, good evening.
John Lafondre, who is standing with Jersey Alliance.
Good evening.
Elaine Miller, who is an independent.
Good evening.
Kirsten Morell, who's also standing as an independent candidate.
Good evening.
And Mary Venturini, who's also an independent candidate.
Good evening.
And unfortunately, Hugh Raymond, who is a Jersey Alliance candidate, isn't able to join us this evening as he's feeling unwell. Right, let's have a look at what we've got coming in. So, first question is coming up. And I will, if for people at home, I will answer one question from each questioner first and then go back to them if we don't have enough questions. So if you get questions in now, you'll find that I'm only taking one from you. Okay. So I've got here, let's have a look through them. Quite long questions. Try to keep your questions short if possible. Okay. So Harry Bader has asked the first question. He says, I run a small business in St John. I used the co-funded payroll scheme and was asked to somehow repay thousands of pounds in the coming weeks. Thankfully, scrutiny has been on top of this. Do you think the next government should take responsibility for the scheme and introduce an appeals mechanism? And what other supports for small businesses do you think are needed? And I'll go first to Gregory.
Yes, absolutely. The way we ran the payroll scheme was that we accepted all applications very, very quickly because we knew that there was an emergency, and some of them, the system may have changed while it happened, and there may be some discrepancies, but certainly there should be an appeal. There should be a way of discussing with the government on whether you've had what you should have, or whether you were paid too much.
Okay, thank you, Andy.
Yes, I think for some people it's been really, really stressful because they were given the money and then suddenly they received a letter to say they had to send it all back again. And I think very quickly, and I think they've been pretty badly treated. And I think there definitely should be an appeals procedure, and everyone should know exactly what the rules are. And I think we should really look after small businesses because they're the lifeblood of Jersey. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary.
Thanks, Harry, for your question. I absolutely think that's really important that we do introduce an appeals system. I think it was very unfair that support was given at absolutely critical time to keep small businesses afloat, and then to be asked to repay that very soon. I think after this the crisis that we have, and we know that we're still in that because we're seeing now that there is a recruitment crisis, and this is related to the cost of living. So not beyond just an appeals process, I think the wider support to small businesses is really important, especially around recruitment and looking at that cost of living, so we'll be able to retain staff to want to live in Jersey, and also to recruit off island to come here if there's not able to find local staff to fill in. And also in the longer term, I think looking at education and higher education to help ensure that we have good skills to help fill businesses recruitment in the future.
Thank you. John.
Harry, as we know, it's all done in emergency because businesses are crying out for the support because of the whole measures that have to be put in place because of COVID. So some of the things that weren't put in place include an appeals mechanism, so no question there should be one there, and I was disappointed to find out there hadn't been. The letter that went out about the 14 days was definitely wrongly worded. The main aim actually was for people to get in touch. The reason people are being approached is that, as with everything, after the event, the due diligence is kicking in. It's the auditors are coming in to go through and see if there are any areas where it looks like where somebody declared a detriment, but actually that detriment didn't kick in. In other words, they weren't actually necessarily entitled to that to the money. Whatever happens, so it's going through an audit process. There should be an appeals process. Whatever happens, any repayment that should take place will be spread over a much longer period.
Okay, thank you. Elaine.
Yes, I agree. It seems to me that this scheme has been poorly communicated from the start. There's a lot of confusion about the information people were asked to provide, and I think the request for repayment came as a massive shock to many people. The request for repayment was badly communicated, and the assumption that business is back to normal to the extent that people are not now carrying debt. Businesses are carrying debt, both from landlords and lack of income for a year or more. There should be an appeals process, and to the extent that people are they are required to pay the money back within the terms of the scheme, I think government should be being less heavy-handed and being open to agree a sensible repayment plan that works for that business. More widely, I think we should be looking to see what support we can give to local businesses. It will depend very much on the nature of the business, so a farm may need different support to a retail premise, for example.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Thank you. It's an excellent question. And there's no doubt there needs to be an appeals process, that's for sure. I think actually it needs to go a step further. This isn't the gift of the Treasury Minister, irrespective of what the auditors think. The Treasury Minister has control of this scheme. And to be honest with you, given that the money will have flowed through every company straight to their staff's pocket, it won't be kept by the company. It was to pay the staff's wages. So actually, I think that the next Treasury Minister needs to look at the possibility of stopping this payback entirely, only looking for elements of fraud. And because obviously where there was fraud, that's illegal, that should not have taken place. But we're about to enter one of the toughest economic times in my lifetime. So I think it's about time the Treasury Minister really looked seriously and considered ending this refund element of the payroll scheme.
Thank you. Mary.
I would agree entirely. There's nothing worse than getting a bill for a large sum of money when the money isn't there. But I'd like to go rather further than this. I would like to find out why and where the mistake was made, because this sort of thing should not happen. And it's not just this particular scheme, but there are other schemes when you're asked to pay tax, you don't know why or where it's come from, and it is very, very difficult to get the answers. And I think this should be investigated all the way through, not just appeals, but go right back to the start and see where it went wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a reminder, get your questions in now to all the candidates. They're sitting here waiting to hear from you. And as I say, make sure the questions are aimed at all of the candidates so they can all answer. And I'm going to go to Jen's next, because Jen's asked, do you think the carbon neutral roadmap goes far enough? And that's going to go first to Andy.
Well, I think we are in a climate crisis at the moment, and I do think we have to make sort of an act, but it's going to be a challenge. I think we're very lucky because electricity prices are electricity comes at the moment from France, and it's mostly from the nuclear power station, or it's from hydro, the barrage, or it's from wind. So that's good, but it's going to be quite a challenge to get us out of our cars, and also for our boilers and the way we heat up our homes. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for islanders, but it's something that we have to run with. But if we can make small changes, every one of us at the moment, by perhaps doing active transport, cycling, walking, then that's a start. But we have to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Hilary.
There is definitely a climate emergency, absolutely recognise that. And so I don't think that the carbon neutral roadmap goes far enough. However, at least it's underpinned by us having the ratification of the Paris Agreement, which means that we are held to international standards, and we will have to report biannually and in some cases annually on our reduction. And so this will put us pressure on the UK. I actually was part of those discussions and those negotiations through being a consultant supporting government with this. And the UK are taking it very seriously. And so they will then ensure that we will also be taking it seriously. So any reporting will be going through the UK. And so that kind of international pressure will make sure that we will actually at least adhere to the roadmap. But we need it funded, and that's where at the moment it's only 10% funded. So we will not be reaching any of the targets that are in the roadmap because of that. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Short answer is yes. However, I think where Jersey does punch above its weight is actually through global finance. And I think if we put the right standards in, which Jersey Finance are actually doing around environmental practices, then actually we may be able to influence better environmental practices and therefore better environmental outcomes with far bigger impact than what Jersey alone can achieve on this little island.
Okay, thank you. Elaine?
I think the carbon neutral roadmap is a very good start, but we need to constantly monitor it, and we need to see what more we can do regularly to increase our efforts. I think as a small island, Jersey should be well placed to focus on things that we can do really well and where we can really be world class in terms of showing the world the way forward, in terms of sustainable tourism, sustainable financing. Our finance industry is already looking at ways of being, they are looking at carbon neutrality, and they will also be looking at investment in things like fossil fuel and how financing can be restricted. I think we also need to look at how we can finance new technologies to reduce emissions, and we also need to look at going further afield. We need to look at impacts of things like migration, because there are populations who will be very badly affected, and we will see climate refugees, and we need to start thinking about our response to that.
Thank you. Kirsten?
Thank you. The carbon neutral roadmap is it's a very decent start. There's no question at all in my mind. Jersey needs to do two principal things in order to achieve carbon neutrality. That is rid itself of carbon emissions from transport, and secondly from heating oil. If we do those two things, then we're a very, very long way down towards achieving carbon neutrality. And the roadmap does help us do that. Where I'd say the carbon roadmap doesn't go far enough, it's in sustainable transport. That's a sustainable transport policy. It is still too weak. It is not going to encourage enough people out of their cars. And secondly, and despite me trying to make sure that there are provisions in this, and they are now in there, it's about green growth and the green economy. I really believe that for Jersey's private enterprise, we've already heard how small businesses are the lifeblood of Jersey's economy. Private enterprise, companies like Evie, can help us change our cultural attachment to the car and in other areas, and can really help us drive our carbon neutrality agenda forward whilst making sure the government doesn't have to pay for everything in that sense.
Thank you. Mary?
Well, the roadmap is there. Strange that it's called a roadmap, where the one thing that we are not managing to do is get cars off the roads. And there seems to be no progress here at all. We're relying on things like electric cars. They're not really the answer. Nothing has started yet on experiments with hydrogen, which we should be doing, because this is really where the future is. We are behind on solar. We are behind on everything. I think we've forgotten that there is a climate crisis emergency. Certainly we've had other emergencies, and the climate one has gone to the bottom of the pile. But I think we should be doing much more. I'm interested to note that in agriculture, there is a lot going on, and I think this is very interesting.
Thank you. And Gregory?
Yes, the carbon neutrality roadmap is a full plan to go to net zero in 2050, as we've promised. We basically signed up for that, so that's the plan. On the way, in 2030, we hope to be carbon neutral, which means that everything except scope 3 emissions will be taken care of. It still needs to be financed, and that's the option for the next assemblies, and not just this one, but all the assemblies until 2050. They need to be able to put the money towards this. The whole budget is scary because it's in the order of £300 million. However, divided by the years and the number of people, we're talking about 1% of our standard of living. And if we can't sacrifice 1% of our standard of living towards the climate emergency, then we really have a problem.
Thank you very much. Okay, don't forget, get your questions in, and you can also upvote questions as well. So I'm going to go now to the current most upvoted question, which is from Adrian. And Adrian says, the independent school funding review revealed there was a £9.2 million deficit in non-fee paying providers. Would you, as a candidate, vote to eliminate this debt so these providers are on a stable footing? And would you remove top-level slicing from education, as Adrian believes this just cuts down service provision? And that will go first, please, to Hilary.
Right. Thank you, Adrian, for your question. I would need to really look into this further to see what is the right way forward. But I think on the top, I think for sure we don't think we should have a deficit for providers. I think that's really worrying, and I know there was recently in the news about that there were there were schools who were unable to have fund some of their key classes and their key responses to and provide provision for their students. So I think that's really important that we do look at that, and that there is a possibility to cut the deficit. I think I would be in favour, but we would need to look into that. On your second question, I would also need to look further into that, but I think it's really important that we give as much look into the funding of education and make sure that we are reaching the standards that we need to help support building skills in Jersey.
Thank you, John.
We are working through the recommendations of the Independent School Review and also actually the early years work that we did as well. And in both cases, we've put quite significant increases of funding in the system already. So early years, nursery education funding has increased from 20 hours to 30 hours now, and education for this particular area has had an increase of around 10 million a year. So I think we just need to see the impact of that, and education/science working within the budget it has, which obviously has increased quite significantly in the last few years.
Thank you. And next goes to Elaine.
I believe absolutely that our schools should be funded completely to provide the education that our children need. That's across the education sector. I'm not familiar with the review, and I'm not familiar with your term top slicing, what that means. But I was educated in the state system. I went to state's primary schools and I went to good comprehensive. I had the benefit of that education, and I think every child should have the benefit of a strong education that allows them then to go on to either training, whether it's further education, training at Highlands, vocational training, and any child who's capable and who meets entrance criteria, we should be supporting them to then go on and have access to university, whether that means paying tuition fees. For some children, it will also mean paying maintenance grants. But the concept that children in this island should not have an adequate education is just shocking.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Well, thank you for the question, Adrian. School funding isn't an optional extra. Education is the future of Jersey, because if our children don't receive the education they need, then we don't have the creativity and the skills, the resilience to have a thriving society going forward. So it's not an optional extra. I have felt for a long time that despite Jersey's enormous riches, successive governments have not funded education properly. It's really good to hear that over the past 4 years, education funding has increased significantly. That's really, really important. And I just don't understand why previous governments have failed to fund education properly. With that in mind, therefore, the deficit does need to be reduced. It does need to be taken away. Schools, head teachers, and the teachers within them need to know that they have the funding and the backing of the government to give the education, to give children the education they need in order to take this island forward. We need a future for our children, and education is where it starts.
Thank you, Mary.
Education, obviously, is absolutely essential. Education and healthcare are the two most important things that we should have available. I think that if school administrations have to worry about funding and where this is coming from, it is they take their mind off what is essential, and that's the education. I think that the deficit should certainly be cut, be refinanced, and this should be absolutely out of the worry of the teachers and the schools.
Thank you, Gregory.
Actually, I will continue on that vein. The government provides 3 core services, which are basically security, education, and health. And early on in our term of office, we decided to concentrate on those services that were the core services and that were underfunded. And basically, we have squeezed most of the government expenses to make sure that we had money for health and that we had money for education. it's a start, and we know that it needs to be continued for the next term.
Okay, thank you.
When I was out canvassing, I met one of the head teachers. She said that at the beginning of every term, she has not got the budget that she needs to educate her children. The cleaners do not receive what they should be receiving, and that is having to come out of her budget. And she was really concerned. And I think we have to do something about it, because we have to be able to educate our children, because it's the most essential thing we can do for the whole of this island. And I don't think they have had enough. They may have had an increase, but it didn't seem that it's coming through. So perhaps education is top heavy, like health is top heavy, and there are too many layers and layers of management. Perhaps we do need to look at where the funding is going, because it should be going to the children and the students of this island. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay. Next up, don't forget, guys, to get your questions in at home. The candidates are here to answer your questions, and you cannot vote those which you want to see go first. And Chris Edmonds at the top of the list at the moment. He has said, do you support the current government's debt financing plan as currently agreed? And how will you manage the risk of a potential global downturn and the long-term reduction in investment returns? So a question to look forward, and that goes to John.
Fairly obviously, yes. Essentially, we've got three strands when we were coming out of the pandemic. One was to fund the debt that arose out of the pandemic, which was all about supporting businesses, supporting islanders to get through what's been a really tough couple of years. That in itself, given very good results from 2021, will be cleared by 2025. The second strand is the pension refinancing, which we've just now concluded, and which actually already existed, by the way, really emphasise that, and will save us £3 billion over 100 years, £300 million of the first 30 years. We were paying between 5 and 6% on that liability. We're now paying 2.875, and we've also shortened the period. And then the final one, therefore, was on the hospital. The hospital, firstly, will be paid for by the returns on the reserves that we do have, and if not, there are two backup plans if we need it, if we get into difficulties. Bear in mind, it's between a 20 and a 40-year period that we'll be dealing with.
Thank you. And Elaine?
Well, based on what John said, it certainly sounds like a very comprehensive and effective package for the island. I believe it has saved money. It does seem to be an effective package. We don't know what will happen in terms of economic downturns going forward. We're assuming there may be a downturn. They may not be. We all assumed at the start of 2020 that there'd be a major crash after COVID, and in fact our house price market has never been higher. The economy is booming. We're seeing increasing inflation, so it may be that the effects in the next few years will actually be positive rather than negative. There's an element of gazing into crystal ball, but I think the government does appear to have done everything it can at the moment to create acceptable and cautious, prudent financing arrangements.
Thank you. Kirsten?
Thanks, Chris. I have no concerns about the current level of debt in terms of us being able to manage to pay it off over time. My concern is about future debt. As a States member, I brought a proposition, which has been, or an amendment, which has been adopted, which effectively restricts the government's ability to borrow too much more in the future by restricting the level of credit rating that the government can go down to. I think that's really important. I'm not a fan of any future debt being used for anything except emergencies, as we saw in COVID. I understand why the hospital has been financed not from the strategic reserve directly, but through debt. It does make sense. But again, I'd be happy to see the cost of the hospital reduced, although that may be unlikely given the high building cost inflation at the moment. So yes, I'm satisfied with where we are. I'm not satisfied with taking on more debt. That's something I'd be strongly standing against in the next assembly if I'm elected.
Thank you. Mary?
For an island that's meant to be very rich, we have an enormous amount of debt, and it would be good if we could start getting it down in the most urgent way possible, because we clearly are going into a global economic crisis. The hospital, £804.5 million, when practically everybody other than the government has said that it can be built for less. This is a shocking amount of money, and this is only the beginning. And this was a budget that was made before the rise in the cost of materials. The cost of wood has gone up absolutely astronomically. The price of cement is going up. Anyway, we shouldn't even be using the cement. And here we are going towards a major problem. The government tells us, oh no, the money's available and everything's fixed. I doubt it. Let's see what happens in the future.
Thank you, Gregory.
Jersey finds itself in a fantastic place. I mean, it's been 2 years of extreme crisis between Brexit and COVID, and we have 1.2 billion pounds in financial reserves. Our total reserves, if we take pension funds and others and social security, are almost 4 billion pounds. We have a lot of cash in the bank, and it makes no sense to spend this cash and forego its returns, forego all the money that it brings, just to buy stuff. One thing is for certain, nobody should borrow to pay for expenses, but there's a very, very good point in borrowing to pay for assets.
Okay, thank you, Ellen.
I would like to disagree. I do not think we should be taking on this debt. I think the way that the hospital of 804.5 million is going to be financed is not right. It was anticipated that was going to be borrowing, I think, at less than 2%, but this is creeping up and it's now 4%. Inflation's going up. We cannot give this debt to our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. We should be being more cautious, and we should not be being spendthrifts in this island. And that was what's happened over the last 4 years. And that's one of the reasons I'm standing, because we cannot do this. We have to take better advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Thank you. So I am worried about the future debt and what that will look like. I'm also concerned that actually the Jersey economy is actually stagnant for the last 20 years, and the finance industry has maybe skewered that. So it looks like we are actually booming, but actually, if you look under the figures, we aren't as rosy as it's painted. And also, I'm concerned because we're talking about having all these reserves, and we have this, but yet we have, 1 in 4 children are in relative poverty. Why aren't we helping them? We've fallen 5 places on the OECD Better Life Index in the last 4 years, where everyone else also on that Better Life Index of the OECD also experienced COVID. So what has happened in Jersey that's meant we've fallen 5 places? So I really think that we really need to look at our finances as a whole, definitely not going in the debt forward, but also realise that if we've got money, then why are we not putting it in the places we should?
Okay, right. I'm going to go to Seb Lawson's question next, because Seb said he attended the hustings fuel earlier in the week, was unable to answer his question because he ran out of time, so I'm going to give him his opportunity. He said for him, a significant number of the problems discussed then and today can be solved through the use of technology. So I'm glad that the technology accelerator was passed by the previous States Assembly. However, my concern, he says, is that Jersey adds layers of red tape which are not required. With that in mind, what will you do to cut the red tape and enable innovative projects to take place on the island? And that goes first to you, Elaine.
Well, cutting red tape for local business is a key part of my manifesto. I think we do have to support local business, the ones that are here, and we also have to enable new business to start. Jersey has a lot of talent coming out of Highlands with the IT degrees and the IT qualifications. There's a huge demand for IT people. I think there is a lot of business, there's a lot of red tape for business. As a lawyer, I've acted for businesses setting up. We capture a lot of information. I'm not quite sure what we do with it. So unless we have a clear purpose for information capture, we should really stop doing it. We do need to make it easier for businesses to operate in Jersey and cut red tape and allow thriving new business sectors. Financial services is very important, but the tech sector, digital Jersey, that is the way forward, I think, for the island.
Thank you. Kirsten?
There's no doubt there's far too much red tape in many areas of government. And the red tape that frustrates me the most, excuse me, is that which affects citizens. So whether it be businesses or individuals when they're going to social security for their long-term care or for their income support, they are caught up in red tape and it makes the experience incredibly stressful. So for me, so much red tape, so much administration can be removed with the use of technology, but we have hardly travelled down that road at all. We have the amazingly named integrated technology platform, of which we've seen nothing yet in terms of results, but in the next year, I really hope that we're seeing something happen, because our government at the moment, our entire public service has not adopted technology in the way that it should. So much of that technology can reduce administration, can reduce red tape, free up people and businesses to get on with doing what they do best, which is living their lives and running profitable businesses. So I want to see results. And one of the first things, if I'm re-elected, I'll do is try and find out a lot more about the integrated technology platform, because it's a mystery as it stands.
Thank you. Mary?
I would agree that technology is the way forward, and the way that the island has been provided with fibre optics has been absolutely wonderful. However, two things jump to mind. One is in the hospital, I believe that there are two computer systems that don't talk to each other, and that medical notes get lost, that medical secretaries have problems. They have to translate notes from one computer system to the next computer system, and this has been causing a great deal of anxiety and stress and problems. The other was the COVID vaccination program. The COVID vaccination program itself was fantastic. I would agree absolutely with that. Unfortunately, the vaccination certificates came with barcodes on them, whereas the rest of the world was using QR codes. And this meant that once you started to travel, you were in trouble, because everybody else was using QR codes, but this island was still using barcodes.
Thank you. Gregory?
Yes, I've always been a champion of science and technology, and I think that will be, for Jersey, the next step after finance. And of course, both can coexist at the same time, which is very helpful. Red tape in Jersey is not as bad as it is in the rest of the world. And we have to accept that some of it is imposed to us from the rest of the world. We are soon going to have a money value inspection, which will look at the security of our finance industry. And basically, that's where the buyers are to creating a company and opening a bank account. Our party, the Alliance, doesn't have a bank account because it has basically become too difficult in Jersey. And this is because the rest of the world imposes such strict barriers to finance that we can't. So yes, I completely agree, but unfortunately, it is quite out of our hands.
Thank you. Andy?
I think technology is really important. I think in the, and for small businesses, it'd be great to cut red tape. Opening a bank account is completely awful. Takes hours and hours, sometimes days. And if there's any way we could improve that, that would be great. I do think that the hospital IT systems need to be updated, because we're on paper notes, and they have to have the hospital IT system talking to the chemists, to the doctors, and for information to be passed easily, because we're way behind on that, and that's something that has to be done, and it's really important. But I have to remember the elderly people can't always use technology, and we have to be mindful that you have to make provision for our elderly citizens as well, and they might not all be tech savvy. Thank you.
Thank you. Hilary?
Thanks. So I think investing in technology to make Jersey economy and industry and different businesses as efficient as possible, I think that would be really useful. But we've been hearing a lot about the fact that a lot of government services are not able to, are very clunky and not able to read different computer systems, not able to read each other. We don't have good data collecting systems. So that kind of accelerator fund not only, I think, should be supporting the digital technology and industry in Jersey, but actually also to not only to help that digital industry, to support the government to be as efficient as possible and to update its systems. I also think that accelerator fund is useful. Sandboxing, I think, is a really good and important place, but in Jersey. But a lot of the time you see that there is not the risk taking that I think that we could in Jersey do in this area. So I think we could do a lot more in sandboxing and also risk taking in this area.
Thank you. And John?
I fought for the Technology Accelerator Fund. I was very clear when we had the dividend from the sale of JT's IoT division that a chunk of that money should go towards growing the digital economy. So I'm very pleased that the question is pleased with the fact that we have it, because actually some members tried to actually stop it, so it wasn't approved. Actually, it's the last proposition of this last assembly, and I was the last proposer, rapporteur on the matter. In terms of, we are the fastest globally connected digital system, fibre system in the world. At the moment, we need to hold that advantage. We've got about a 6-year head start. In terms of systems, we got criticised for the level of investment we are putting into government IT systems separately, which was why I shook my head about using the technology fund. That is very much got to deliver the efficiency we're looking for. We have something like 800 systems that do not talk to each other. That is one of the ways you will reduce the red tape burden on individuals and businesses.
Thank you. Okay, moving on now. The favourite topic, I'm sure, of many of you, which I'm sure you're getting on the doorsteps. Al or AL, I'm not sure how that name is given, says he wants to talk about the hospital. Now, he says, or she says, sorry, I don't know, given that the finance model for the hospital shows that, albeit with a drain on medium-term gains of the 1.2 billion strategic fund, we're building a state-of-the-art hospital for free, it's claimed, that the site selection process was comprehensive and that there's no perfect site. Can the candidates give their views on the Our Hospital project, Kirsten?
Nothing's free, let's say that. So the hospital, as we said earlier, is being paid for through debt, which we paid off via the returns on the on our investment reserves. That's fine, I understand that, but you're still losing the opportunity cost, or you're still spending the opportunity basically that would have been there from the investment returns had you not used that debt. So it's not for free, and don't let anyone tell you it's for free, because it's just not true. I'm satisfied with the way we're financing it for the moment. I would like to see the cost reduced, if at all possible. What I won't stand for is stopping this hospital project in any way, because it will only cost Jersey even more money. I said that when they had the rescindment debate for the Gloucester Street site. That was 460 million. Now we're at 804 million. If we stop this again, we'll be talking 1.2 billion or more. So absolutely no to stopping this hospital project. We will have a world-class hospital, whichever way, but we do need to see, can we reduce costs in some way, shape or form?
Thank you. Mary?
I would dispute that we'll have a world-class hospital. Andy knows more than I do about what is in it and what isn't in it, but there is one hell of a lot that isn't in it that should be in it. Part of the problem was that it was designed around the Jersey care model. Unfortunately, the Jersey care model really doesn't exist. So the hospital is in a pretty bad state. What do I think about the project itself? I think it is the most illogical, badly thought out project that I have ever come across. I'm not talking about the site. I'm quite happy with the Overdale site. I'm talking about the fact that then somebody woke up and said, oh, there isn't a road up to Overdale, or we don't like the road that's up to Overdale, then we better make a better one. Having got to that stage, they then said, oh, their buildings up at Overdale is in use. Where are we going to put those people? Oh, we'll have to run around and find a site. So off we go to Lekennebay. The whole thing has been so badly thought out. Planning itself with 3 plans is a disaster.
Gregory?
It's a little bit demeaning to hear that the 300 or 400 professionals that have participated to the project so far are such idiots and have completely forgotten that you would need a road to go to a hospital. I'm a little bit sad to hear that. There are 3 important things that you need when you build a hospital. The location, it needs to be accessible. So it has to be in town or touching town. That is it. Any other site is a nonsense. The second thing is that it has to be the right size. Right now, we have about 70,000 square meters of health real estate, and the new hospital will be the same size. And the third thing, and that is extremely important, it needs to be expandable. And what we're building is a campus that leaves enough space for that hospital to change over the next 70 years of its lifetime. I think it's a very good project, and stopping it now would be complete nonsense.
Okay, thank you. Andy?
I unfortunately do not agree with Deputy Leader. This hospital will not serve the people of Jersey. It is not future-proofed. Too much is missing. We only have 175 overnight beds. We have no rehabilitation ward, no physiotherapy department, no OT department. There aren't proper offices for the consultants to work. This hospital will not, we're not going to have a child development centre because there's nowhere for it at the moment. They've got to think about that. So there are lots of things that are not right with this hospital, and we should not go ahead until everything has been worked out stage by stage, and we know where islanders are going to receive their care, because at the moment it is a mess. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Hilary.
Thank you. So we absolutely need a new hospital. Talking to staff at the current hospital, it's really clear that there needs to be movement to actually start building this, and it's been for too long pushed to one administration to another. So we absolutely need this. It's really worrying, though, to hear that within the wider health community that this hospital is being built around the Jersey Care model, when that Jersey Care model is not being financed and is relying on a huge number of staff to come in to support, but yet we are not able to even recruit staff right at this moment. You know, there is lots of vacancies because of Jersey's cost of living, and so that has to be looked at. So we're not just talking about a building for a building's sake, but actually looking at the health system as a whole, the hospital being one bit within this bigger system to help us and throughout our whole healthcare system.
Thank you.
I unequivocally support the Overdale site and the hospital for all the reasons that Gregory has outlined. In terms of the funding, use of the reserves, and bear in mind these are slightly out-of-date figures, but it gives you the principle. Not using the reserves and borrowing is about £1.7 billion cheaper than if you did use the reserves and run them down very, very low. Just to be very clear and remind people, Gloucester Street never got planning permission after 2 attempts. That's why it was necessary to go elsewhere, given all the other issues, including the fact that I was told by the professionals it would have been out of date within 4 years. It's very clear we do have an issue of key worker accommodation. It is, and key workers as a whole. There is a work stream happening. There have been some movement on it, but we do not improve our retention of nursing and medical staff if we do not get new hospital facilities, and that they work in are pretty bad.
Thank you. Elaine.
Well, I also agree that there's no question that we need a new hospital, and we need it fairly quickly. We cannot keep digging holes and filling them in again, which is what we seem to have done with the previous hospital project. We do have to proceed with this. What I care about very much is that the costs are monitored and controlled. I do have concerns about the way government monitors costs and controls costs and makes people accountable for them. We do need consultants, we do need experts, but it must be crystal clear that when we bring them in, we are not giving them a blank check. We must be crystal clear what parameters they're working to, and we need to make sure that their costs are monitored and supervised at all times. I favour a review of what's inside the hospital. If there are key departments that aren't planned at the moment, then we need to look at whether we can fit those departments in. But what matters is that we have a hospital that meets the needs of the island, and I do think that's becoming very urgent.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Well, I started that one, we've got the hospital.
It was really nice to do it again.
Sorry. All right. Okay. Next question then. And a reminder to those at home that we are taking one question from each person initially, and I will go back to people who've asked several questions. I'm not getting any questions about the parishes, so do get your constituency questions in as well. Tracy's next. What would your plans be to diversify the tax base in Jersey, considering the majority of our income is based on personal income tax, and like other jurisdictions will see an impact from an ageing population? That will go first to Mary.
Well, I would bring back tax on companies. I know nobody likes this idea, particularly those who have small companies. They think it's an incentive, but I would most certainly tax companies. I would tax internationally based companies even further, and I would give the advantage in this island to the ordinary taxpayer. I think this is absolutely essential, particularly in this supposedly rather rich island. I think the individual is absolutely should come top of the pile and not bottom of the pile.
Thank you, Gregory.
Actually, I do agree. We were imposed 0-10. It's not something that we chose to do. Unfortunately, the same people that imposed 0-10 on us are actually now thinking about a worldwide base tax, and it's something that we could have in Jersey. And indeed, because company tax is transparent to people, locals would pay exactly the same amount of tax as they do now, but foreign companies would have to pay tax locally, which would only be fair.
Thank you, Andy.
Yes, I think the 0-10, we had to adopt it at the time, but I think it is going to change because of the OECD's, what they've said over time. I think we could possibly ask people who are coming in as 2-1E immigrants that they could pay more than they're being asked to pay at the moment. I think that it's quite advantageous for them at the moment, and I'm sure they could contribute more to the island. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hilary.
Yes, I think there definitely needs to be a review of the tax system. I think there does, especially on the corporation tax. There is, a 0-10 was imposed on us by the EU. Now there has been changes, and we've got the OECD BEPS Pillar 1, Pillar 2 coming in, which will, of course, bring us some revenue for some of the big groups that are based in Jersey, which will help us then have that review. Also, I think high net worths do need to be looked at. I think they're being given a very good ride at the moment, especially because they've all been given a flat rate for over long term. Yet we're seeing that high net worths are gaining more and more money at the moment. I mean, we've seen that. I think food and fuel billionaires are getting 1 billion every 2 days, something that Oxfam has published recently. So we should be also reviewing that kind of baseline tax as well for them.
Thank you, John.
Just a minor point that 2-1Es, I agree, for new ones coming through. We have suggested that they should be, that the threshold should be increased in terms of the levels of tax they should bring in. In terms of looking at the wider case, obviously when GST was introduced, that was to diversify the tax base that we have. What I would say, certainly the advice we've received for probably the next 2 or 3 years is not to do any tax changes at this stage, because essentially allowing people to recover from the whole impact of COVID, etc., etc. And bearing in mind, so in other words, to take account of the economic challenges that we are facing, the OECD work will have some impact, some positive impact on revenues. We need to remember that any changes, fundamental changes to our tax, we have to make sure we comply with international standards, so it is not something that one can dream up around this table on the hoof. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.
Yes, I agree. Our income tax laws, I think, go back to 1961. Jersey's a vastly different place now than it was 60 years ago. So our tax system could always do with review. And I think the difficulty with tax is that nobody wants to pay more tax, and it's very easy to pull tax policy out on the hoof and find that instead of helping people you most want to help, you disadvantage the poorer earners. You squeeze the middle earners, who are always being squeezed, it seems, and the richer taxpayers actually benefit. Tax policy needs to be very, very carefully considered. I think enough's been said about corporate tax already, but I think that also needs to be considered. But I think GST, a number of people spoke to me about GST, perhaps on things like food, but again, it's better to have targeted support for people than just broad brush tax changes that may have adverse effects.
Thank you. And Kirsten?
It's really simple. The moment they brought in 0-10, it was doomed at some point. They just didn't know when would it stop working. And it stops working when it's squeezing islanders, hard-working islanders, too much. And they're just taking too much. They're relying on individual islanders and their families to keep funding an ever-increasing growth in government. That doesn't work. And so we have to move away. For the first reason, that's the first reason, we have to move away from the current tax system we have based on personal income tax. The second is, if we want a stable population that isn't continually growing, then we need to change our tax system. Because at the moment, the tax system requires continual growth in the number of people coming to the island in order to keep funding an ever-growing government. So we have to change. Corporate taxes we do already have, and we can look to extend them, but not at the expense of the finance sector and not at the expense of enterprise. Having 0% when you start a new business is a huge incentive, it's been said, but it does help enormously. I know this, I run small businesses, but we already tax big retail businesses. We should look at larger hotel businesses and so on. There are many ways. I'd love to speak to you more about that.
But not now. Sorry. Right, okay. So next question is from Alan. How will the candidates propose to deliver affordable housing, which is obviously another hot potato topic, rather than developer priced housing? Goes first to Gregory.
Sorry, what's the second one?
How will candidates propose to deliver affordable housing? Is Alan saying rather than developer priced housing, but basically the question is how are you going to propose to give people affordable housing, which is obviously a big issue at the moment.
Well, basically, this government started the largest campaign of house building in the history of Jersey. Andium House has a plan for 3,000 more homes, and that's about 50% of what they own now. The government itself has a plan for 2,000 more homes until 2030, and that's again a very, very big improvement. Our problem with the next government is going to be to manage this building and make sure that we actually don't crash the market. Unfortunately, between deciding those things and houses actually being delivered, there's 3 to 4 years, and that's why it's not happening in time. But it has all been launched.
Thank you. Andy?
I think with building, we could do something like the Trinity parish scheme, whereby the parish owned a third of the homes. The person buying put in a deposit and got a 2/3 mortgage, and that seemed to work quite well. And then eventually, if they ever sold, the parish would get the money back. So we could think about loan schemes elsewhere in other parishes. And we also need to think about the rental market. I think the Jersey Homes Trust is a really good idea because it keeps low rents, and Andium does the same. And we have to it's a really key thing. I think for people coming in, essential workers, we really should be refurbishing Westaway Court, because that's been left empty since 2017. And we need that to be done very quickly, because we really need to look after key workers. Thank you.
Thank you. Hilary?
Thank you. I think there are several ways. It's not just focusing on just building as many houses as we can. Actually, I think that could actually have a detrimental effect on the market. But I think what we need is to make sure that those that are being built will be as the cost to be as low as possible and climate resilient, but also that they're built as a community. What's worrying is that a lot of these houses that you see, they're being put into different fields on green sites without actually thinking about the community around them, and you don't see that kind of wider community plan of kind of the facilities, the amenities, what about the new schools around that, or expanding the schools, or sustainable transport options that can get people from away, into other places and down to town. So I think it's really important to look at it from a wider community plan, not only just building in different green spaces.
Thank you. John?
On the supply side, you need to get the pipeline sorted out, which is effectively what we have done. As Gregory was saying, it's going to take 4 or 5 years, and as I've said a number of times, it's going to take very continued focus, and it's one of the reasons I want to go back in again. Once you've got that pipeline established, you can then get your affordable housing products further advanced. There are some out there already with both Andium and SOJDC. There's also £10 million budgeted and available for the enhancement of those products. Russell Abbey has issued the Jersey Homes Promise at the end of May, beginning of May rather, and that does talk about priority to affordable to first-time buyers and affordable housing for development-led schemes. Essentially, you also need to, from inception all the way through up to delivery, we need to ensure that the process is as slick as it can be, which it presently isn't.
Thank you. Elaine?
I agree with a huge amount that's been said so far this evening, but I think that the missing link in all of this is that we really need to understand our current demands for housing and our future demands for housing. I don't know if the census will necessarily give us that when that data has been analysed. I think we need a really carefully considered and planned population strategy, and that really has to underpin all our future thinking on housing. In terms of housing, I do think we need to look at help to buy schemes, whether that's shared equity, whether that's estates providing loan funding. I think we need to be prioritising buy to live. So where developments are being sold, we should be aiming to prioritise people who are buying to live in those properties, rather than allowing investors to buy multiple flats in a development, which means they're then out of reach or simply not available for purchasers who do have deposits and mortgages set up. And I think we could look to repurpose existing empty buildings rather than build new ones.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Yes, I was going to say exactly the same about rerunning the analysis of what our housing need is. The census, unfortunately, was taken at a really difficult time when the island's population was in flux. So we don't know where we are in terms of population at the moment. A year after the census, so much anecdotal evidence that people are leaving the island, but we need to formalise that and understand it. So we need to analyse what the actual housing need is and keep that analysis going. When it comes to home ownership, it's no question. I agree that the Help to Buy schemes, I agree the Trinity scheme does seem to be very, very good. People are very happy there and it's helped a great deal. The housing trusts are doing fantastic work, but we also need to try to take the pressure off the housing market. Pressure off the housing market can be done by removing the incentive to buy investment properties. So again, much higher stamp duty on people buying for investments, as well as making sure we finally get to grips with unused properties and bringing them back into use.
Thank you. Mary?
Affordable housing is one of the big issues, obviously, at the moment. But there are so many aspects to it. There is the rental aspect, there is the building, the construction aspect. There's so many coming online, that's fine, but that's in 4 years' time, when at the moment we have a crisis in the construction industry simply because of the supply lines. Therefore, we're probably going to have to wait even longer. People who are applying for affordable housing have to go through, and let's get back to that red tape all over again. We have a crisis there as well, the amount of bureaucracy that they have to go through, and then there are long, long waiting lists for people to get the affordable housing. All this somehow has to be speeded up. Certainly the bureaucratic side can be streamlined quite considerably. But here we do have one of the most serious problems in the island.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And you're obviously living in very happy parishes, because nobody's asking any constituency questions at all at the moment. So we're about halfway through. So if you do want to ask a constituency question, get them in now. Steve Carter has asked you all, given that many are focusing on population and housing, as we just issues as we just talked about, do you think it's a good idea for the island to be advertising through Locate Jersey abroad for more people to come and live here? That will go first to Andy.
I think we do need some people to come in because we do need some skills, but it has been very unfortunate that of late, it seems to me that local people are not advertising for them to take the jobs in the first instance. And it's rather disconcerting for everybody living here, because I think before this government, it seemed to be that the job adverts went out locally, and only if there was no one suitable locally did they advertise elsewhere. But this has not been happening. We've been using lots of headhunters and people of that sort to get people to come over here. And I think we should be using our expertise. We should be training our young people to take jobs, and we should encourage them to rise up the ladder. Thank you.
Thank you. Hilary.
Yes, no, I think it is not right that we exclusively looking at Locate Jersey rather than first of all finding the talent on the island. We can see that this, especially in the government itself at the top tier, have looked out of the island and have brought people in at great expense. So I think it really needs to be looked at, not just now but also for the future. Do we want to keep doing that? So we need to really make sure that we go back to that education and to the skills training, and to really make sure that we are building up the skills in Jersey to make sure that youngsters and those starting in their careers see a path forward, and don't see that they think, oh, I'm going to get blocked at some point because we're going to bring somebody from outside to come in to fill those senior roles. So I think it's really important that there is succession planning, there is a trajectory in all the different jobs, so that people feel that they can rise through the ranks.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
My understanding for Locate Jersey is that it's mainly aimed at the 2-1Es, which I think is the basis of the question. So now, just to be very clear, I value and support the wealth of residents that we have on Ireland. I have met some of them, and without any exception whatsoever, they've been exceptionally supportive. They love the island and they want to contribute and be part of that community. You'd like to do it discreetly, and the one I can point out, for example, is the donation received in St Lawrence, which I was delighted to receive on behalf of the island and the government for the playing fields next to the class church. That was a contribution, a donation, very welcome from one of our wealthier residents. We have others who assist in other matters, including for the likes of other third sector organisations and charities and things like that. Do I think the threshold should be increased for that? Short term says yes. That's not only an alliance policy, but as a whole, because actually the higher value ones are hugely contributing to our island.
Thank you, Elaine.
Well, while I agree with what Andy and Hilary have said in terms of recruitment into, I think the adverts they're talking about are the ones that come through Team Jersey or OneGov, we do need to make those much more open to local people. However, I agree with John. I think Locate Jersey is aimed at wealthy, high net worth residents. Those people do come into Jersey and they do a very great amount of good in Jersey. The rules are very clear. They must be paying a fairly large amount of tax. They must be providing basically philanthropic work in Jersey, and many of them do, as John says, provide a vast amount of philanthropic work. They do a huge amount in the community. Many of them are buying some historic properties and making sure they're maintained at their very best. Some of them are opening those properties for various charitable events. What I have been told, though, however, is that some of those families, they would like to do more in Jersey, but they are being slightly hampered by lack of support from certain government departments. Where people want to invest into Jersey, we should enable them to do so.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Thanks for the question. Locate Jersey does two things, actually. One is it attracts high net worth residents. The other thing it does, it tries to attract investment businesses into Jersey. I would like to see Locate Jersey's focus much more on the business side and perhaps less so on attracting new high net worth residents. We have many high net worth residents who are doing great work over here, as we've heard. I'm very pleased they're here, but we need to change tack on that. We know post-pandemic that high net worth people around the world are looking for safe, small islands to live in. That means the demand has increased. Basic economics tells us so when demand increases, the price goes up. And so the price for coming to live in Jersey as a high net worth resident has to increase significantly for new residents coming to Jersey. It's important I highlight new residents, where the residents coming to Jersey. The rest of Locate Jersey should be much more focused on attracting businesses in Jersey, particularly in the technology sector, low footprint, high value businesses. I want to see a lot more of that coming out of Locate Jersey.
Thank you. Mary?
I would love to think that that was the answer to attract new businesses to Jersey. But if you're going to attract new businesses to Jersey, you're going to attract new people. And here we go round and round the mulberry bush again. That's going to mean a shortage of houses. It's going to mean trying to find labour on the island network, which we know is already absolutely short. This is one of the other problems that I found as I've been going around, that people cannot find staff. Now, this is a really serious problem. It is as serious as housing, I think, because if you can't find staff, your business cannot grow. I was talking to a man who has a scaffolding business. He needs at least 6 workers. He can find 3. And he is desperate. And he asked me the other day, what is the future of Jersey? And I said, I think it looks a bit grim at the moment.
Thank you. Gregory?
Yes, so Locate Jersey tries to attract high net worth individuals into the island. Just to make a point, they pay 20% tax on their Jersey income. There's a minimum threshold, so they have to pay at least, last time I looked, £145,000, but it might be more. So it might be more now. But they pay 20% on their Jersey income, so that's quite important. They could pay an absolute fortune. I disagree a little bit on making the thresholds larger, because actually, when they're selected on a whole file. It's not just the money, it's the person that they are. And I think it would be quite interesting to select people not necessarily on how large their income is, but how large their capability of integrating into Jersey and developing further business into Jersey would be. I know a few of them who became bored on landing into the islands and immediately started small businesses that are thriving and doing a lot of good to the island. And those are the people that we should choose, rather than to say, oh, we just want a figure at the end of the year.
Thank you. Okay, so you touched on the issue of employment and the struggle to get employees at the moment. Tamara's asked a question. She said, what are you going to do to encourage young Jersey people to take the jobs that are usually occupied by those from other jurisdictions? While most of you are advocating putting restrictions on people coming into the island, it appears to Tamara that newcomers are essential given that local people are not interested in the lesser paid roles. So that question will go first to Hilary.
Okay, thank you, Tamara, for that question. So I've put in my manifesto that I think we need to have in Jersey, we set up an independent skills agency that can go into schools and give every school a chance and each students to be able to see what kind of careers there are in Jersey. I think there is sometimes too much of a focus on attracting students into the finance industry rather than showing them the broad range of really interesting careers and work that can be done in Jersey, and also to be able to set up your own business, for example. So I think there needs to be much more focus on encouraging students to be able to see what kind of diversity there is in Jersey. I think also there needs to be that emphasis of higher education. I think there needs to be more investment in higher education to help build skills, and also long term as well through life skills as well, to ensure that we get lots of new skills to the island. Thank you.
John.
I'll talk about government first. We have, it's one of the changes we've been trying to put through, which is ultimately about growing your own. It's about putting career paths in, career progression, ultimately trying to be an employer of choice. That takes quite a change in terms of culture and making it attractive. We've got things like the I Will campaign, which is about encouraging women within the organisation to move up. You've got apprenticeships, including for care leavers under the sort of corporate parenting side. You've got nursing degrees coming through. All of these take some time to have an impact. If you look at, but there are mechanisms in place. I think part of that is actually further communication, actually, as Hilary says, about the wider opportunities there are within government. And then it's a skip to the island then. We obviously were made very aware of candidates very recently, and I've been aware previously of the schemes within the construction industry. Other industries have similar schemes as well. As we bring all that together as part of the skills work that we do.
Thank you. Elaine.
I think the basic problem is, as Tamara said, that the jobs that people have to come into the island to do are the jobs that frankly people don't want. And it's very well, I agree, we do want, young people want successful careers. They want jobs where they can go up, where they can progress, where they can develop, where they can learn. And there are many industries in Jersey, not just financial services, law, accountancy, although they're linked, and at higher levels of hospitality into hotel management and construction management. There are numerous areas where, and government, people can have good careers. So with that perspective, why would they want to go and do unskilled, lowly paid jobs in primarily, I presume, in hospitality and agriculture? Those are, if you're committed to hospitality, you may do that job for a season and then you want to be moving on and upwards. We do have a need for incoming workers, and I think the thing is we need to be able to keep bringing them in on terms that treats them fairly and which allows them to come in on a seasonal basis and earn a satisfactory living.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Yes, to answer your question directly, because it's a fascinating question. How do we encourage, if we don't want more people coming to the island, how do we encourage islanders to do the jobs they don't want to do? That's the question you're asking. And I've been thinking about it for many years. It's a really difficult question to answer. I think one way is for pathways through businesses. So when you're starting young, you're on apprenticeship schemes within certain sectors. And obviously you start there, you start at the bottom and work your way through. But we're also talking about jobs like cleaning, harvesting vegetables, fruit from the fields, etc. These are the jobs that islanders used to do before I was born and now no longer do. That, I think, has to be, at the end of the day, it will be in the main seasonal staff who do those sorts of jobs. But also, to some extent, technology will pick up some of those elements. We already have technology being deployed in fields and in homes. But I honestly spend a lot of time thinking about that, because Jersey apparently doesn't want to do those jobs, and we don't want more people coming in.
Thank you. Mary.
I think automation will make a difference. We're only at the beginning of this new revolution. And I think that those jobs can be picked up by robots, artificial intelligence, something that we haven't even touched on in any of these hustings that we have been at. And those will be able to take up field jobs and cleaning jobs, not in the hospitality industry because that is a skill, but in agriculture, yes. What I feel is that there probably isn't enough excitement for young people in the island. Just looking around this table, I should think every single one of us has gone away and come back again. And I think this is, in a way, it's part of the education of islanders, that they go and they come back again. But I think there should be some sort of schemes to encourage people to come back to the island.
Thank you. Gregory.
Jersey has lived a long time trying to be a discount destination, and I think that doesn't work for the future. Basically, there are too many obstacles in us trying to be the cheapest on the market, and I'm especially thinking of agriculture and hospitality in this. If we want to survive in hospitality, we have to have a luxury product. We shouldn't have waiters in jobs. We should have maître d'hôtel. We should have sommelier. And those are good careers that people would probably want to have. It's the same with agriculture. We cannot have a generic product. We have to have something really special that is interesting to cultivate. I used to run a vineyard, and nobody was thinking that they were doing a cheap job running a vineyard. So unfortunately, this will take maybe 10 or 15 years to do, but this is the way that Jersey has to go.
Thank you. Andy?
Yes, it's a really difficult subject, this, because we really, when COVID showed us that we absolutely need the people who work in our supermarkets, our people who help us in the fields and grow our crops, waitresses in hospitality, carers, and these are all unfortunately not very well paid at the moment. So that's why I think young people perhaps don't want to go into those careers, and perhaps we should be thinking of paying our carers more. We should be really valuing the people who do service in our supermarkets, but it's a very difficult concept. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've talked, there's a couple of questions coming about education of young people, and N. Heath has asked a question. Do you think the 2.9% increase in the student maintenance grant to cover 5 years is enough? They're talking about the 2018-2023 period. They said that the government hasn't reviewed the interim student finance scheme and it wasn't produced in the government plan. So is it enough, John? First.
I think given the challenges that everybody is facing, it's going to be one that will have to become get under review quite rapidly when the new government comes in. And I think that's probably all I can say at this stage is I accept that life has changed since the last update, and that we need to make sure that students going away can do it on an affordable basis, because kind of segues into our previous conversations. If you need the people going away and giving the qualifications and ultimately coming back to the island.
Thank you, Elaine.
I agree, it seems far too low, and I think it will have to be reviewed. I don't know how much the maintenance grant is at the moment in terms of the full amount, but I have read that there are students from Jersey in the UK who are in rental arrangements which include electricity, whose rents have already gone up by £500 a term. Now, and I imagine that is much more than 2.9% that will totally obliterate the 2.9 increase in maintenance grant. As I said earlier, I firmly believe that we should be giving young people who meet proper university criteria, who want to go to university, the support to go there, to get the training, to get independence, to learn life skills, and just to see a bit of the world, get a good education, and then bring those skills and experience and education back to Jersey to contribute to our own economy.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Absolutely. The UK is predicted to have between 7 and 8% inflation next year. Obviously, most students in Jersey are going to be in the UK, others will be further afield. But a 2.9% spread over 5 years increase is not going to help with a single annual increase of 7 to 8%. So it has to go up. Otherwise, we will be stopping people from going to university. And as I said earlier, education is key to Jersey's future survival as a prosperous place, as a prosperous island. So there's no question it has to go up. Obviously, grants are means tested, and that's understandable. I don't have a problem with that, but we will need to look at the spread of that means. As the cost of living rises, we'll need to see the impact on households and whether we'll need the grants to be offered to more people as well as increasing the grant itself. But I will not hold back on education. It's utterly vital to this island's future.
Thank you. Mary?
It seems much too low to me. I know that that people in the UK are already struggling. It must be even worse coming from here, because you've got all the complicated things like flights there and back there and back. So I think it must be looked at urgently. What I would also like to look at in a vision for the island is whether more higher education could not be provided on island. I know this is an old subject and has been turned down many times for all sorts of reasons, but I do feel that some more higher education could be possible in certain subjects in Jersey. It could offer all sorts of opportunities which possibly are not even offered in the UK, and I think that should be looked at.
Thank you. Gregory?
Yeah, just for the record, we do have masters and PhDs being delivered on the island right now, and we're looking at extending that range. Yes, 2.9% was adequate 3 months ago when this was about the rate of inflation we were expecting. Now that we're expecting between 8 and 10%, depending on the figures you look at, this will be inadequate. And actually, I believe that it will be the first task of this new government to deal with the inflation and the cost of living.
Thank you.
Yes,
Andy?
I know I shouldn't say I agree, but I do agree with what everybody else has said. I do think it's not enough. I think it's quite hard because I believe that we're classed as international students still, and I think that means that we have to pay a lot more than other people, but that's not true. No. But if we're, I think we should encourage local degrees and people studying here, so it saves a lot of money for them. They can live at home, but then they miss out on the experience of going away. But it's really great that we got nursing and a law degree and social work and sport. It's really good that we're offering those degrees. Thank you.
Thank you. Hilary?
So the maintenance grant is not enough. And so it does definitely need to be reviewed as soon as possible and increased to the rate of inflation that the UK is going to experience and is experiencing. So we definitely need to do that. And I think it becomes in that wider question of education that we talked about earlier, that education does need to be at a higher priority within the government and going forward, and that we need to look at the whole financing system, because you've got those going to university, but if you've got already what we were talking about earlier about deficits within the school system, in the primary and secondary school system, that means that there are students here who are not getting the full education, that may not be able to even get to the university. So I think it's really important that we look throughout the system to make sure that its education is done. And also I think means tested as well needs to be reviewed and expanded to ensure that we are capturing as much of the just managing families as possible.
Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to get around as many questions or questionnaires as possible, because some of you have asked multiple questions. So I'm going to go over to Sarah now. Now she says, can we just be honest here and admit, says Sarah, that high net worth people come to Jersey to avoid tax and nothing else. What she's asking though, is it fair for people to pay tax on food whilst offshore companies pay zero? And that will go first to Elaine.
We have kind of touched this already. I think that the difference with our corporation tax is that our corporate tax system is there partly to meet international standards, and it's important for Jersey as a jurisdiction that we do meet international standards, because the last thing we want is to find ourselves on a blacklist or a grey list as a tax haven. Jersey is not a tax haven in terms of the wider international world. There's a very accepted definition of that, and we need to make sure we do not fall into that definition. But I do agree, GST on food is a real challenge. I don't think it happens elsewhere. I would imagine that if the Treasury Minister was here, she'd be saying that removing GST on food will not give as much benefit to people who are worse off as it does to the better off people. We do need to find targeted solutions, but I certainly think GST on food is something we need to think about fairly closely in the next term.
Thank you. Kirsten?
I think GST as a whole needs to be looked at. I think it doesn't serve the purpose that we need it as an island to serve. Because, for instance, it means that people are being taxed on products which in many other jurisdictions are not taxed. It means that because it's flat rate across everything, it means that we're not able to tax those behaviours, such as buying very large cars with very large engines that aren't desirable when you're trying to get to carbon net zero, etc. So, but I also understand that by keeping a flat rate across everything, we keep it low. What I find interesting, and this I think speaks to the government's lack of technology as a whole, is that if you go to many other countries, France, Italy, etc., it calculates a tax on your receipt, different types of tax. One meal in France, you'll get different tax rate on your food compared to the drink. It's done immediately by the tills at source, and that's then sent to the government. Our Treasury Department seems unable to cope with that sort of differentiation. So I really want to understand why, because I think we do need to review and understand how better to use our GST system, because I don't think it's been used to our full advantage.
Thank you. Mary?
This is about GST and tax, as well as being about food, I think. And I am worried that there is food insecurity in this island, and it is going to be even worse during the winter. Now, this is something that we are going to have to look at. And I think that one way of looking at it is food waste. There is an enormous amount of food waste at supermarkets, not because it's intentional, but simply because we have use by dates, sell by dates, etc., etc. This food is being basically thrown away. It shouldn't be. We should look at this. I know that most of the supermarkets are English-based supermarkets, but I think that is something that we are going to have to look at, not just food banks, but what is being left behind by supermarkets. And I think we must have some sort of system to look at this over the winter.
Thank you. Gregory?
Sorry, on the first question, actually, there are many jurisdictions which are cheaper than Jersey for tax, for income tax. So for high net worth individuals, if they look to relocate to Jersey, usually it's about the lifestyle, because there are so many other places where they would pay zero. The first one, remarkably, being the UK, where you can be non-domiciled for years and years and actually pay no tax whatsoever. The second thing about the goods and services tax, that was poorly named, and that's one of the problems. It is not a goods and services tax. It is a sales tax. It is a point of sale tax, and that allows us to make it very easy to manage and very cheap. If we use the VAT, which is an old derelict tax, we would have to look at every single product differently. And the enforcement of that is actually extremely expensive. So better to keep it simple, low and broad than complicated and high.
Thank you. Andy?
Yes, GST for us is 5%. I'm just worried that at the moment there are a lot of families who are really struggling, and they've asked, could you take the tax off basic foodstuffs? I think we've taken tax off tampons and sanitary products, and I think we have to look carefully at whether we should take tax off basic foodstuffs, because it perhaps seems immoral that we're making people pay tax on their food, because food, we've got to have it to live. I don't think that the £20 a month is really helping people who are really badly off at the moment, and a lot of people are using food banks, and although that's good that we've got food banks, should people be having to use those? And it doesn't make me feel very comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you. Hilary?
Thank you. On your first point, I think actually high net worth is not just about the Jersey being a good location. I mean, usually they have multiple locations, so they can flip between those different locations when they want to. So it's not just because Jersey, I think, is the right place to live, because they get to have a choice, which a lot of us don't necessarily have that choice. But I think on the GST, I think it's really important that it could be utilised much better. It is really a flat rate at the moment on everything, and so we aren't utilising it as best we could, like in other jurisdictions, where we could be taxing much more things that are detrimental to not only our health but also to the environment. Foodstuffs especially, I think we do really need to look at, because we are in the food security. The food banks are increasingly being used by islands and islanders, so we really do need to look at that carefully and ensure that there is really accessible food is accessible.
Thank you, John.
Okay, I disagree with fiddling around with GST on food for a variety of reasons. Number one, other places do tax food. UK in Europe is basically what we were told at the time by the, I think it was HMRC consultants actually who came with us, who knew their stuff. You've got a choice between an archaic system, UK, Europe, that's the Jaffa cake, is that cake or biscuit, all the legislation, all that sort of stuff. We are a separate jurisdiction, or a modern system, which is places like New Zealand have. What we did at the time, by the way, you are right from the point of view of this, we did feel for people at the bottom end of the income levels, they should be compensated. And what we did at the time was increase the income support package to take account of changes. We also put in fact, I modified it, what's called the community cost basis, so that if you didn't pay tax but didn't get income support, you could also simply claim something as well. In terms of cars, things like that, actually don't touch GST, do touch, I've forgotten the name of it, but what we do.
Vehicle registration.
Thank you. Yeah, and hit that a step.
Thank you. Okay. So let's go on now to Sophie. Sophie has asked, and this is all directed to you all now, about you guys. If elected, what specific role, if any, would you look to undertake in the States Assembly? That goes first to Kirsten.
Thank you. It's interesting. If elected, and I've said this numerous times in the States over the past 4 years, I will always be a States member first. I think it's too often people think about the roles they want to play. You are a States member, you've been elected as a States member, that means you represent the people in your district and the people of the island. That's your primary job. Everything after that is just an add-on to your role as a States member. So always a States member first. It's very simple. In my ideal world, I would like another role. I was Assistant Minister in Economic Development. I would love to possibly look at being Economic Development Minister, and being able to continue the work supporting farming, the marine economy, culture, arts and heritage that I have started, and I really want to continue, particularly developing careers for young people. If that's not possible, if I am not able to attain a ministerial role, that's absolutely fine. I'll go into scrutiny. I previously chaired a panel. I absolutely loved it, and I loved questioning ministers. I loved holding the government to account. So whatever, I'm a States member first, and the other roles may or may not follow up.
Thank you. Mary?
If I am elected, I shall just be very happy to be a States member. I don't look any further than that.
Okay, thank you very much. Gregory?
It's going to be very similar. I'd love to continue all the projects that I've started this term, but I'm also very, very happy to go where I'm needed.
Andy?
I just really love to get elected, so please give me your vote on June the 22nd. And if I get elected, I really want to make a difference to this island for the good of everyone. And I'm especially interested in health, and I think there are lots of work to do in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary.
Well, we're in a new district, and actually I've asked the question, like, how will it work afterwards? And that no one has actually modelled that. So I think, first of all, when we're elected, the 4 deputies will have to work out how they will work together to ensure that they're supporting St John's, St Lawrence and Trinity. I'm proposing a forum as well, where the 4 deputies come together with the 3 constables. So we really make sure that no issues that come up within the parishes fall through the cracks and are left behind because maybe they're not as interesting issues as others. So I think that's really important to start there. Again, also, I'm really want to be a good States member, and therefore be very much involved in all the discussions. I am used to holding ministers to account by my work in the European Union and also at the UN, so I would really want to work on scrutiny to learn more about how the States Assembly works, how decision making is done, and who has the hold positions. So that's where I'd like to work.
John?
I do want to try and advance much of the work that we've started, but because of COVID, we've not finished. I always take the view that I work for the benefit of islanders wherever I am. I've been a statesman for 16.5 years, assistant minister, I think vice chair of PAC, chair of scrutiny panels, president of scrutiny, represent the island of British Irish Parliamentary Assembly, Assemblée Parlementaire de la Francophonie, and more recently British Irish Council, to name but a few, and obviously chief minister for the last 4 years. So if I go back in on the ministerial role, I think, as I said, I'm not intending to go for chief minister at this stage, something around treasury, external relations, or around the regeneration work that we, or digital work that we've implemented. But ultimately, we all seek to serve for the benefit of Irelanders and the parishioners that elect us.
Thank you, Elaine.
Well, I can only agree with that. And I think on the back of the leaflet that you would have had delivered through your doors a couple of weeks ago, I said that I would be looking to work closely with the other 3 deputies for the benefit of the 3 parishes in our new district, and also with the constables in each of those parishes, to do the best job we can for residents in Trinity, St John and St Lawrence. That's a given. Being a good states member is a given, but I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for a very long time. I've had senior management positions for a long time. I have represented the island as Viscount on international forum, and I would like to either be in scrutiny. I think my skills would lend themselves to being an assistant minister, and I would be honoured to be asked to be an assistant minister. I would be particularly interested in economy, health and community services, or even housing, because those are the areas that I'm most focused on in my manifesto.
Thank you. Okay. Right, we can all say thank you now to Alan for asking a question about the constituency. He says that in parts of the constituency, dangerous and antisocial speeding is an issue for many residents. What measures would the candidates propose to tackle this issue, as the law seems to be ignored until accidents happen? That's what Alan's view is, and that goes first to Mary.
Funny it should come first to me, because coming back from the hustings at St John's last night, the night before last, there was a speeding car which came down the road faster than I've ever seen a car go down a narrow road. Luckily, I was wearing my high visibility Vote Venturini jacket, and I was not in the middle of the road, as some people do walk down the middle of the road. And I was so shocked, and it was actually raining, that I just didn't know what to do. He avoided me, obviously, because I'm here this evening. I didn't take his number plate quickly enough, but what would I do? It's a very difficult question, because this happens at night. I was talking to one of the centenarians at Trinity yesterday, and he said, we've got to have mobile cameras because this is happening all the time. We've got to change the system. This is something we've got to deal with.
Thank you. Gregory?
It's a very good question, because I've actually been in all positions, from actually holding the speed camera to, of course, managing the police. Yes, there's only one solution. It is mobile cameras, and we've actually made them legal in Jersey. They weren't until very recently, and it is now up to the parishes and their honorary police whether they want to invest in them and use them. I think it's the only system. The things happen at night. Sometimes people prepare them, they reckon the road and then go and speed. So the best way is to have a small camera by the side of the road. They're not very expensive, they're available, and we would be able to catch the very, very few people who actually flaunt the law.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, I'm very closely associated with some of the honorary police in Trinity, and they have been out at night sitting on the side of roads trying to catch. It's very, very difficult to catch these boy racers. They've thought of putting stingers across the road, but they can't do that. So I think probably the only solution is apparently if you know anyone who lives near you who may have a souped up car, then please tell the honoraries that they're there. But speed cameras would be really good, but you would have to set them at a high speed, because otherwise they get clogged up with people perhaps going just over 40, and you get loads of people. So you'd have to set them properly. But it is something that I think the honorary police are doing a great job, but they're scratching their heads, and they'd love to be able to sort this problem out.
Thank you, Hilary.
Yeah, no, I think that it is really good that the mobile speed cameras have been put into law. You know, it did take time, so it shows that this is, you know, something that we need to speed up putting legislation through when there's a clear problems that lots of parishioners have raised. I think also the other thing is collaboration between the parishes. I think with honoraries, you know, systems to make sure that everybody is working together. You know, we're a small island, and especially speeding cars go quickly through parishes. So I think it really is important that we have that coordination and linked up sting mechanisms to be able to ensure that we really get them, you know, at the times we need it to. So that's, thank you.
John.
It probably goes, hopefully not needing to say, but I'll say it anyway. Obviously, absolutely support our honorary police officers. They are a critical part of our community, and I know they're doing their best to try and you know, catch these people when they do it. And I think we all get extremely annoyed, as I do at times, when you hear the kind of racetrack drivers whizzing around at 1 in the morning, whatever time it is. Don't currently add much more to what Gregory said about mobile cameras, particularly if it's now in the hands of the parishes, and ultimately that leads us back to earlier conversation about having the right technology, and maybe that then leads into a bit more of a collaborative effort between the various parishes across the island, and ultimately making life difficult for those minority of drivers who frankly drive at reckless speed.
Thank you, Elaine.
Well, it's difficult not to agree with what everyone said already about the honorary police working together, about speed cameras. But I think there's another element to it, which is there clearly is a community, and I'm not going to say it's a particular gender, there's a gender bias in speeding, but I think it does start with education. We should be educating children at quite a young age about the dangers of the road. As we start to move towards carbon neutral, we should be trying to get people out of their cars, and part of that getting out of the cars is also making people understand the environmental impacts of speeding and the social impacts of speeding, how disturbing it is for others. And I think there is something to do with education, both at school, at the time of driving test, within the garages who are doing the work, that it enables these cars to go as fast as they do and as noisily as they do. So I think education has also to play a major part.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Thank you. I think Mary's experience has told us, I think it's a miracle that we haven't had more injuries and deaths from people speeding at the kinds of speeds that we're seeing in the lanes in Jersey. There's no question about the coordinated effort between the parishes. That makes a lot more sense. And maybe as deputies now across 3 parishes, we can help in that. I think that's something else. I think we need honorary police forces to be at their full complements. We've seen some fantastic work in St. John, which I now believe has a waiting list of people wanting to be honorary police. So I think, again, deputies can help in that area across the 3 parishes. I've had a really good conversation with someone who asked me a very similar question. And one of the things I think perhaps we need to look at is much higher penalties, including for people caught speeding when it's racing type speeding, 60, 70 miles an hour or higher. We should be looking at impounding their cars, taking their cars away from them. Can we remove licenses for that sort of thing? Because when there is that disincentive, I think you're much more likely to stop people doing it. So there are a number of things we can do, including education as well. But it's not just one thing. You need a whole suite, a whole package.
Thank you. Okay, staying in the parishes, which is good. Tracy says, what would candidates do for sports, wellbeing and education offering in the parishes with the likes of the Adult Education Centre, schools, St John's Rec, and youth centres? And she's saying instead of building more, but utilising infrastructure more effectively for residents. And that will go first to you, Gregory.
Well, one of the many things we tried to start during this term was a sports facility renewal. And basically, we looked at about 10 projects around the island because the sports facilities needed to be upgraded, but also changed into community centers. So it's a 10 to 15 years project, but basically we're going to take all these facilities one by one and make them perfectly adequate for the sports that are practiced in the parish, but also as community centers. So we are doing that, but of course, it is a long project. And one of the issues when you do anything like that is that it has to go in sequence because you move people around. While one is being rebuilt, people have to go somewhere else. The starting point for this was, of course, Springfield and Fort Regent.
thank you.
And I think we should also, I think the question was that what could we do without the facilities? So
Building new ones, I think she's what she
Without
said.
building.
without building, okay. Well, I think for all of our parishes, we're jolly lucky because we've got sea. And so I know that every day we're down swimming, we're canoeing, we've got paddle boarding, people are diving at Bully Bay. And then for other people, they have lots of really wonderful walking groups. And that's a really good way for everyone to take part and talk, and it's good for their well-being. And cycling. And then we've got, very lucky, we've got the sports facilities at St John where we could play squash and tennis, and that's gone on for 40 years. Yeah, it's been just the same. And there's for little ones, the skate park as well. So we've got lots.
Thank you. Hilary.
Yes, no, I think it's really important that there is this revitalisation of the sports facilities that we have. It's fantastic that we have St John's Recreation Centre, and we need to make sure that that is revitalised. You know, we have already a number of things that we have a cafe used there. We have community centre because we also have, for example, children's facilities there as well. So, you know, it's used beyond the sports. And I see all the time lots of residents always using the facilities at the weekend and using the outdoor space. So I think that is a good start. Where I see, and I live in Zion, and I know a lot of Zion residents find that it's really difficult that we don't have access to those kind of spaces, and that's something that, you know, we are really asking for, that we can have some more community space in places like Zion that are actually going to be built up more in the future, and we need to provide more facilities as well. But
thank you. Thanks, John.
Actually, as an island, we are incredibly lucky because I think every parish, in terms of community facilities, obviously has a parish hall. Oddly enough, coming to other smaller other islands, not necessarily small ones, that's quite unusual for them. And on top of that, they usually have community facilities somewhere nearby or attached. And we mustn't overlook that. The youth club and things like that, that I think were also included in the question, are certainly fantastic. Certainly, as a family, some of my family have benefited from using those facilities. So I think it's about continuing to support those and enhance where we can. In terms of other activity that we can do about building new buildings, I go back actually to things like footpaths and things like that. I'd like to see much more of a holistic network across the island, which is about activities, about community in terms of creating them, but then gives you the links off road to again as a general form of exercise or just leisure.
Okay, thank you, Elaine.
I agree. I think both sport and education are really critical for well-being. One thing that I have noticed, I believe Highlands used to run a very extensive adult and community education programme. They used Highlands College itself. They also used the Philip Mouron Centre, and the Philip Mouron Centre particularly seems to have dropped out of that programme. That programme did a lot of daytime classes, which were a bit of a lifeline for older people. So I think we need to look to why the Philip. I'm sure there's some development that has been delayed. So keeping the Philip Mouron Centre online, looking to Highlands to increase both the education and the activity. There was art, craft, sport, the whole works. I think there's also something to be said for our medical profession to, and I know they support this as well, I believe they support this, to look at more sort of social prescribing, so more, let's form groups where people go for walks, they can do other forms of activities and social activities, and that may be better than just giving someone antidepressants and anti-anxiety, give them social outlets. It's very valuable.
Thank you. Kirsten.
I'm really pleased to say that in Culture, Arts and Heritage, we actually received a grant recently for social prescribing because we want to deliver that through Culture, Arts and Heritage, and I believe that's also taking place in sports, so that's really important. I think sport it can be done on your own, or it can be done with people. In general, my experience of it is I prefer doing it with other people, and so I think one of the things we need to do is help people come together. So it's using the facilities, yes, but also using other communication tools such as social media particularly to help people come together and understand the types of activities that are taking place, that they can undertake them with people of a similar mind, a similar age, similar illness or something like this. And so I think we don't use social media enough to bring people together. And I can't help but think about all the swim groups who came together during the COVID period to go outdoor swimming. They coalesced through social media. That's how they got together, and they've been incredibly successful. So I think there's a lot of work we can do just to create an evolution in the way we come together to undertake sport together.
Thank you. Mary?
I think up in the north, Trinity and St John's in particular, are very lucky. We've had the recreational centre for a very long time, but now we've got the new track at Sorrel. Motorbikes, I think it is, or cars. I'm not quite sure which it is, but it's very lively on a Sunday, and it's for young people. Of course, we've got the walks. We've got the harbours, we've got the jumping off the piers, and I do think that this is something that we should try and encourage. I remember when I was a teenager, we were always outside. We weren't in inside facilities at all. And Jersey is amazing for that. And I think that is something that we should try and encourage rather than building buildings. Let's get out of the buildings, out into the fresh air, whether it's into the sea or the rock climbing or the paths along the north coast.
Thank you. Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions. We've had a lot on economy and education, so I want to go now to Karen's question. She says, what are your views on the LTC scheme, the long-term care scheme, and the fact, in her view, that the LTC scheme does not represent the current costs of long-term care? What would you do to change this dire situation for many people across the island? That goes first to you, Andy.
Yeah, I was talking about this with someone today. If for some people, they have to wait until they've spent £58,000 before they get any help. I think the long-term care package is very difficult for people to work out how it works. If you're ill and elderly, you have to remember that you need to have an assessment by a social worker before you can get on the long-term care scheme, and lots of people don't know that, and so they wait. Time goes by. We unfortunately haven't got enough social workers, so it takes 3 months to get the assessment, and all these things add up. And I think at the moment Islanders are really suffering because they're being turfed out of hospital too quickly. There aren't the physios and the people and the carers and the occupational therapists to help, and it's a huge problem.
Thank you. Hilary?
Thank you, Karen. I think you've also sent us this on email as well, so I've read that and your thoughts on this. So thank you for that, because I've really been thinking about how to answer this question. I think it is a complicated package, and that is why it's really difficult for people to access the full care that they can get. So I think making the communication easier, making it easier to understand is probably the first line there. The second is it is difficult to access from investment and from funding point of view, and so that really does need to be looked at. And again, I think it's part of the whole health system and offering that has, because that is complicated. It doesn't seem to be looked through as a whole system, and we are coming into a situation where we've got an ageing society. So this is really something that we must look into as the next government. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
I agree. I've also seen the email from Karen, assuming it's the same Karen. But long-term care is meant to be about limiting the huge financial impact of care, and obviously it's growing. And I think it's absolutely right. Karen's not the first kind of instance one one's heard of. I think it is time that it is reviewed so that we properly understand some of the issues, for example, that Karen has identified to us separately. So it does need a review. I do make the point we lost 2.25 years because of COVID. Otherwise, I think we'd have been looking at it a little sooner. But it should be one of the earlier pieces of work that the new council ministers undertakes.
Thank you, Elaine.
Karen, I also have your email, but I haven't really had a chance to read it this morning or to respond. I absolutely agree. Long-term care is a very complex area. When I was Viscount, I had a number of clients who needed long-term care. I found trying to get through the system, to get them to even to understand what long-term care was, how people could claim for it, the whole issue with social work assessment and the length of time it took. And I agree with Hilary, a huge part of the problem here is simply communication and accessibility and understanding. And there does seem to be a view in government that it is not for government to explain to people how to claim benefits to which they're entitled. I don't really understand that rationale, because I think if government can't explain, I don't know who can. So I really would like to see very clear statements about what long-term care is, how people claim for it, what the rules are, what you're entitled to, what you're not entitled to. There have been reports about people having to top up care. They think they're having care paid for by government, and then they're having to pay top up. So I really think long-term care needs review. With cost of living, cost of care, it definitely needs reconsidering, and it definitely needs better communication.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Hi, Karen. Yes, I think we've spoken about this, and I'm hearing from plenty of other islanders as well, and it actually reflects what I'm hearing in terms of income support. The amount of stress that people go through dealing with the trying to claim benefits in itself is just wrong. It's just morally wrong and needs to change. Long-term care was brought in for very good reasons, and I remember the previous Chief Minister saying on a number of occasions it was award-winning, or words to that effect. That's great, that was fine then. It's not working in the way it should be now because it's causing so much stress. I know that it costs about £14,000 a month for 24-hour in-house care, but I know that long-term care often only covers about 8,000 of that cost. So that leaves the person dealing with £6,000 a month. You try finding £6,000 a month. It's just, for so many people, not viable. So we massively need to review long-term care, income support, and the bureaucracy that surrounds it, because they're really causing too much stress for islanders.
Thank you. Mary?
I was going to say, cut the bureaucracy. You have to traipse from department to department. You're doing this at the most stressful moment of your life or your partner's life. This is something that absolutely must be reviewed, especially if we're turning people out of hospital when earlier than they should be turned out of hospital, and there are no rehabilitation facilities. I think also that there could be somebody who is put in charge of each person's long-term care. I don't know who this could be, because doctors obviously are overworked, but there should be some central organisation that looks after this particular patient from the time they leave hospital until the end of the long-term care, and to guide them and their partner or whoever's looking after them through this terrible process.
Thank you. And Gregory?
Well, I have to agree with everybody. First, that the fact that we have long-term care is very good. It is not every country that does have it, so it's a good thing that we have it. Second, that it's overly complex. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We recently tried to analyze it and had difficulties understanding it ourselves. And the last thing is I will agree with the fact that if at all possible, it would be remarkable to be able to have one person in charge of each patient when you're going into long-term care, so that they would be responsible for them and could follow them through their journey.
Okay, thank you very much. Final question, you'll be pleased to hear. AL says, do you believe in the parish system? And if elected, will you restore both the parish representation and the island-wide mandate to the states? And that goes first to Hilary.
Thank you, Al, for your question. Something that's come up a lot in the hustings, so this is definitely a passionate subject. I do believe in the parish system. The parish system is fantastic. It builds community. Not everybody utilises it, but I think it's something that is really important. I'm the editor of the parish magazine for St John's, and it's fantastic that every quarter we can celebrate so much things that are happening in the parish of St John's. I know that happens in all the other parishes as well. So it's really important that that parish system continues. As it is on the political level, it's really difficult to see how this current system will work going forward. As I said, with 4 deputies trying to cover 3 parishes, it will be really hard to work out, who is responsible, how are the constituents, who do they come to will represent them. And I know that is a worry for a lot of people. So I think it does need to be seen how these elections are going. I know lots of people are thinking about not voting because in protest of this new system. So I think it's something that has to be reviewed when we go through this. We need to review it and see if we can change it.
John?
Absolutely, I support the parish system. And when I was Deputy at St Lawrence, which I did for 4 terms, I served on all sorts of things, whether it was the parish magazine, from inception. I led the parish football project in Warwick's Valley, which was a very rewarding project with 60 volunteers, battle plows, you name it, and also various parish committees. So absolutely, it's a key factor of our community. I still consider the removal of senators without a yes/no referendum, ideally run probably now when most people are paying attention, was a travesty. And I'll still stick to that, irrespective of other people's views, I'm afraid. And we are committed to reviewing the system. If we can, obviously, that will depend on the majority of the Assembly and what the outcome of this election is going to be. I think just separately, ultimately, for me, two minor corrections, about two actual things from previous answers. One is we do have a 50 things to do in Jersey app, which I think would be rather good. And secondly, the Jersey Kennel is about patient pathways and looking after from inception to completion, or should be.
Thank you.
And I do
Thank you.
believe in hopefully positive politics.
Elaine.
Yes, I also support the parish system. I think the parishes, in the context of housing, both St John and Trinity have got some really good examples of housing developments that they have promoted and worked with Treasury to develop and provide homes for older people and for young families. So the parishes are very well placed to work on developments like that. They also engender community spirit. And I think certainly during the pandemic, many of the parishes really came into their own by marshalling groups of volunteers to support elderly and vulnerable islanders, including those who were unwell during the time. So it definitely has a huge amount to contribute to our general society and community. I would like to see senators returning. I haven't heard anybody yet who is happy to have lost senators or to have lost a parish deputy. And I would also support the return of senators before the next election.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Absolutely, the parish system it's genuinely the heart of Jersey's community and what binds us together ultimately. I'm involved in the parish in many ways. I attend regularly assemblies. I'm with the Battle Flowers Associations, Lawrence also Twinning Association. And what I find fascinating is Twinning Association, a really good example. It can be used for so much more than just visits. I've been using Twinning Association to build commercial ties between not just Lawrence, but the island and the town we work with in Barnville, Carteret. Senators, more than happy to see senators come back. The vote that we had was horrible. It was a horrible vote. We'd already voted and voted against the system. And I voted against the system which got rid of connétables. It was then brought back again, and it was a horrible vote. I think a island-wide mandate is really good. It shouldn't be across the whole island, because we see there are problems in Guernsey because people aren't picking up local issues. So no, more than happy to bring back centres. I think that does need to be looked at. The parish system we must protect for many years, many generations to come.
Thank you, Mary.
I think the parish system is absolutely essential. It's where we have our roots. It's where we feel protected. It's where we know people. We go to the local shops. I think, however, we've seen this evening that there are island-wide problems which also apply to each parish. Whether we go backwards and bring back senators, or we move forward and we make deputies island-wide vote, I think is something that it could probably be examined. I think the constables are very solid. They look after the parishes, and that is absolutely right. That they should also sit in the States, absolutely right. But I think maybe that the deputies should be elected on an island-wide mandate, rather than going backwards to senators.
Thank you, Gregory.
Well, those who know me know that I consider that the parishes are basically the heart of Jersey. They're the biggest part of the island identity. And those who follow the Assembly will also know that I fought tooth and nail against this slightly ridiculous electoral reform. And the first thing I will do if I'm elected back in the Assembly is to maintain the constables in the Assembly, restore the local deputies, and have an island-wide vote for senators.
Yeah,
Thank you, Andy.
and I totally agree with that. The parish system is the basis of Jersey. It's what makes us tick. We've got 12 parishes. They all are very important. This time I'm really happy to support all 3 in our district, but I don't think any of the voters I've spoken to want this system. They all feel disenfranchised. Their democracy has been halved. It was not a good system, and it was brought in against everyone's wishes in our parishes. And I want to go back as well to the island-wide senators.
Thank you, but don't forget to vote is the main argument here. And thank you very much for all your questions. And of course, thank you to all the candidates here this evening. Gregory Breeder, who is Jersey Alliance, to Andy Howell, who is an independent candidate, to Hilary Jearn, who's also standing as an independent, John Lafondre, who is Jersey Alliance, Elaine Miller, who is standing as an independent.
Thank you.
Kirsten Morell, who's also independent candidate. Mary Venturini, who's also standing as an independent. And unfortunately, we didn't have Hugh Raymond with us here, who's also on your ballot papers. He's a Jersey Alliance candidate. He was not feeling well. Well, thank you again. Tomorrow we're back at 7 again with the Deputy of St Saviour candidate. So you can find that link on vote.ge tomorrow. And of course, you can get all your information about hustings and how to vote on vote.ge. Thank you for joining us.